Welcome to this week's episode of Two Angry Men, where Mark Geragos and Harvey Levin discuss the David case and why the mystery of the woman in the trunk may stay unsolved for a long time. Enjoy.
But here's the thing. If the ME comes back and says cause of death undetermined with Celeste Rivas, I think the DA would have a next to impossible chance of securing any conviction against anyone, because I don't see how you prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt if the ME has enough doubt to say, I don't know. Welcome to the Two Angry Men podcast. Mark, there is a private investigator who is talking about the David case in the media. And I have to say, the information I'm getting is not what he's saying. He is saying that there seems to be only one person that he says he's identified who has had a key to the house that David was staying in other than David, and that he could isolate who drove that Tesla. He says July 29th, where he says it was parked for the last time before it was towed, where Celeste Rivas's body was found. I am told, and he says it could only be then one person. I am told the exact opposite. And I have sources, one in particular, right in the middle of all of this, who says that there were multiple people who had keys to that house and multiple people who had access to the Tesla for a long time, and that there is no way it could be isolated to a single individual. This was a party house, a house so notorious the neighbors were all complaining, and they were having parties right up until the time that Celeste's body was discovered. So none of this is aligning with what this PI is saying to me.
Not only is your information correct, but I'm told as well that there was not only more than one way to get into that house, but there were numerous keys and access points into the house. And that comes from almost an unimpeachable source. And in addition to that, that the access to the car was clearly not limited to just one person.
Yes.
Clearly not limited. And you don't have to speculate as to how the authorities know that. The authorities know that there's actually three different ways, separate ways, that they know that there was access in that car, and that car was accessed and driven by more than three people in the week prior to it being parked.
Yes, that's exactly, just so people know, Mark and I have not talked about this.
We haven't talked about this, and we're not talking the same people, because your people are different than what other people are.
And I'm getting the exact same information. And I'm told a lot of people. So I do not think, look, I'm just saying that this is not aligning with what this PI is saying. What I am hearing, Mark, is that number one, that David has not been notified in any way, shape, or form that he's a suspect. That's number one. Number two, what I'm told is what the shoe that everybody involved in this is waiting to drop is toxicology.
I was just going to say it's the ME, and that's precisely, it's amazing. We got the exact same information. Not only has he not been, now remember, for people who don't know or aren't in the weeds in Los Angeles, this is primarily right now a county investigation. County meaning it's the DA's office supervising the police investigation, number one. If this were federal, you would say, okay, is it a person of interest? Is it a subject? Is it a target? None of that applies, because this is the county prosecutor looking at it. There is no indication whatsoever that they have said, hey, to his lawyer or to anybody who represents him that he is, you're about to be arrested, or you better surrender, or we're going to pick you up after a show or after a recording session. Quite the opposite. They don't know where to begin. And by the way, the police have been very, people keep saying they're not giving us anything. Even you said, Harvey, they've been tied to the best.
Yeah.
They did say we're not, they telegraphed, we're not even sure about a crime because they can't say anything yet. They don't want to get over their skis until they get an ME report that is fully baked.
It could be, for example, a drug overdose, which is not a homicide. Now, if
Right.
if the body was cut up in any way, that could be a crime, but not the crime of a homicide. And so they need to determine, was this a homicide? Was it something like an overdose? They're not going to know that fully until they get a tox report back. And that's what everybody's waiting for. I made some phone calls this morning, and I have not gotten anything definitive, but what I can say is that various people who would be in a position or should be in a position to know what the results are, my information is they're still in the dark. And that suggests to me that the tox report isn't in. What's confusing me about that is we are now, maybe we're getting into a 2-month territory since the body was discovered. What I don't understand, I know it normally takes a couple of months to get a tox result back. Why wouldn't they move this, Mark, to the front of the line? I'm
Look,
confused by this.
this is what I'm told, that you could, if you wanted, expedite the tox results. You could get the report back on the tox in less than 72 hours. I've done it. I've actually had it turn around in 24 hours. The problem they have here, I'm told, is that because of the decomposition of the body, the length of time between presumably when she passed and from when it was actually delivered to the coroner, that there are all kinds of complications scientifically with them drawing any conclusions about the results that they get. And I'll give you a perfect example of this for people who understand it from alcohol. In alcohol, in a DUI case, you have to generally test somebody within 3 hours because the alcohol dissipates. In a GHB date rape case, the half-life of the GHB dissipates in an extremely quick fashion. If you don't get tested, you don't get a result generally. This you now have, depending on what, if anything, was ingested, you don't know, and scientifically, they may not be able to ever render an opinion as to what was actually in the body at the time of passing and what could have, and I don't want to say metabolized, but what fermented, what actually happened in the period of time from when the passing to the discovery, and whether or not any of the things have any of a scientific ability to then extrapolate and say this was what was in the system at the time and was the cause of death. They're having a devil of a time establishing the anything to do with the cause of death.
Well, two things. One, that aligns with what an LAPD captain told us who is running this when he said to us that, and on the record, that this was a complicated investigation, and that could explain that. But the other thing is, if they can't determine cause of death because they can't do a proper tox evaluation, the DA is going to have a hell of a time charging anybody.
Well, and one of the problems is, and I've had this in numerous cases, if the coroner bases part of his cause of death on information he's getting post-mortem from a detective or from somebody else, then that is ripe for a cross-examination that says you weren't able to draw a conclusion purely from a scientific or based on a biological basis or based on a pathological basis or doing it on what was at your disposal scientifically. You're doing it based or informed on what you're getting after the fact. And that is why it's so complicated.
So we have spoken with the owner of the house who rented it out to David's manager, and then David stayed there. The owner has asked the LAPD for a return on the search warrant, or at least to know what was seized, because it's his property. They are radio silent with him. They will not tell him. That's
He
how.
won't get that. He won't get that because what's going to happen is, I'm sure what has happened, I will make a bold prediction, not knowing that search warrant return is most probably under seal.
Oh, it
It will
is. I can tell you, yes.
Yeah, because you probably sent people down
Yeah.
there. And they're not going to unseal that return. And for people who don't know, when you get the search warrant, the affidavit is under seal because the affidavit has got the statement of probable cause signed by an affiant under a declaration under penalty of perjury given to a judge. The judge will allow certain portions of that search warrant to be delivered when it's executed that basically says you can go search here, here, and here, and these are the items you can take. However, when you go to file the return, which is what you're talking about, you have to file that with the court because the court is the one who technically takes possession of it, but outsources that to the police. And that return will remain under seal while the investigation goes on. And up until and unless they charge somebody in connection with this, they may not unseal it. At some point, it probably will be, but the only way sooner than that is if there's a criminal filing.
Yeah, I wasn't really even talking about the search warrant. I don't know the answer to this. It's his home. And, does a homeowner, especially one who rents a place out where he says, I need to know what was taken from my house, aside from the search warrant being sealed, do they ever work with a homeowner to know, hey, here's what we took? Because ordinarily, you would know if you were living in the house and you own the house. He wasn't living in the house, but they still won't tell him.
That becomes a judgment call. I mean, legally, he could do a motion for return of property under 1524 or one of the other code sections of the penal code and say, I want this returned, I want that returned. For instance, if they took property that he had in the house, if it was a partially furnished house that he rented or something along those lines. If, however, stuff that they took is connected to the investigation, a judge would do a balancing act and say, look, a ongoing criminal investigation is going to trump your right to get the return of property, and therefore I'm not going to grant the return of property. That would be my speculation as to what would happen if he tried to pursue that. If the homeowner, however, is cooperative, and by all accounts that appears to be the case, they may facilitate the return of things that he may need. For instance, if there's a security system, if they've already imaged the security system, meaning the cops, and they have an image, they may give that potentially back to him, although I doubt it, because then it would be challenged if somebody's charged later on that the image is not as good as the original, and that would expose them to something. So there's all kinds of nuances to what they could return and what they might return.
I know generally the area where you have pretty good recon with sources. He is right now, they're trying to figure out, did she die at the hands of someone else? Did she die from an overdose? Whatever. But at the same time, she was 14 years old when she died. There is plenty of smoke that we've seen that David had some sort of relationship with her. And he was an adult and she was 14 and was younger than that even when they were allegedly together. We know that. Do you have any information on whether there are parallel investigations going? One, if she was killed, who killed her? And two, was he having a relationship with a minor? Would they be looking at both of those now, or just focusing on um, the alleged homicide?
Based on and this is completely based on who is supervising this investigation. It is, if there are parallel tracks, I don't want to call it parallel investigations, but parallel tracks, and one being kind of a sex-based, when I say sex-based, I think you know what I mean, versus just the homicide-based. Based on who is supervising this right now, they're exploring every track but the homicide investigation, if it is a homicide. Because remember, a homicide is death at the hands of another. That is not even clear at this point. But that investigation is being conducted by a unit that is not primarily concerned with kind of the implication that you are
Right,
drawing.
and that's what I'm raising. That robbery homicide is handling the death investigation. Sex crimes, which is a separate division, would be handling what I just referred to, which is, was he having a relationship, a physical relationship with a minor? Um, and I don't know how that works. I've never really seen anything like that in the DA's office. Does one defer to the other? Do they
They
do?
have, in the DA's office, traditionally, they have vertical units. And when I say vertical units, you've got major crimes, you've got sex crimes, you've got, I jokingly have called the heads of sex crimes the sex crime queens, usually, depending on where they are. You also have, for instance, the capos section, you've got the public integrity section historically. This is in a section and is being supervised in a section that is other than the sex crime section.
So a lot of people think, well, wait a minute, why would the DA be involved if they haven't even decided it's a homicide? The DA is absolutely involved in this case.
Absolutely, the DA is involved in this case. And by the way, when you hear, so people understand that, so there's no misery. When you hear it's still in the investigative stage, it hasn't been presented to the DA's office yet, or something along those lines, that is really exalting form over substance, because the DA's office, and this is a historical, this goes back a generation or more, they get involved and oftentimes roll out very quickly after something. There is that parallel kind of supervision along with either LAPD or LA County Sheriff, or if the feds are involved, a joint task force. But they are updated, they are asked questions, especially when you have search warrants that are executed, especially when you want to get information, as you would in this case. This case is heavy duty in terms of, you want all of the Tesla information. You want all of the information about the phones. You want to know all of the cell phone records. You're going to want to know where the cell phone records of all the various people are. You're going to also want to know, have there been, on the history of complaints within LAPD, what has been presented to both the DA or the city attorney at various times on the history of that location, of everybody involved. And you're going to have the DA's office intimately involved if there's any kind of outreach to somebody for cooperation, which, by the way, there already has been.
So I spent some time this week with Ellen Greenberg's parents. And Ellen Greenberg is the woman in Pennsylvania who had 23 stab wounds, yet the ME said it was suicide, which is bullshit. And there's something really janky about this. And it's the second one, that she stabbed herself in the back of the head multiple times, and somehow this was suicide. But I asked them, why haven't you filed a civil lawsuit where you could grill the ME on the stand? And she said, we were advised that even in a civil lawsuit, because the cause of death didn't align, which we obviously believe is not suicide but murder, that we would have no chance. I don't know that that's true, but
I don't, it's not only, I'll go so far, when you frame it in that way, it's absolutely not true.
Well, I told them that too, to be honest with you. And I said that even if it's an uphill climb, just grilling the ME on the stand is worth the price of admission for you because you want to get to the bottom of why they are doing
Well,
somersaults. But
you actually, with a civil case, you get something that you don't get generally in criminal cases, absent some unusual circumstance. You get a deposition where you can
right,
go, depending on the jurisdiction, up to 7 hours or longer.
right. And we went over that. The reason I'm raising it is that, these lawyers were advising them because of the ME's finding, it's going to really be hard. If the ME in the Celeste Rivas case ends up saying undetermined, how hard would it be for prosecutors to mount a case that would stick with a jury, which requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt, if the ME himself can't come up with a conclusion?
Well, you bring up a point. I'm literally this morning on a completely unrelated case, something that we do all the time. Whenever you have a case, whether I'm defending somebody who is accused of a crime or I'm representing the family of somebody who is the victim of a crime, one of the first calls that we make is to to get a private autopsy done, because as you know from over the years, I mean, two of the people that I've dealt with for years, either Dr. Bottom or the late Bodden or the late Dr. Cyril Wecht, would conduct the private autopsies and often would give you insight and had the expertise that frankly an overworked coroner will not have. And so that's one of the first things you do. If you're Celeste Rivas's family and you want to know what's going on, one of the first things you do once you get the remains is you have a private pathologist do the examination so that you get some answers yourself. You don't, eventually the the body gets released to the family. They don't keep the body ad infinitum. So you get the body, you hire a private pathologist, you do. And by the way, if you don't have the funds for a private pathologist, there are ways that you can get it done without any out of pocket. So there are a multitude of ways that you could approach this, and that if you had lawyers who are doing what they should be doing, they should be doing that very same thing. In fact, I don't want to second guess anybody. They could be doing it already. If you're representing David or you're representing somebody connected to David and you want to be helpful, one of the ways to be helpful is to reach out to Celeste Rivas's family and or somebody, the next of kin, and offer to have a private autopsy done so that you can get the answers and you can move things up or speed things up and make sure that you've got a backstop or a parallel investigation going on. You don't want to rely on somebody who, and I'm not throwing shade anywhere, but it's one way to conduct a parallel investigation to get to the bottom of it, to make sure that you're getting the answers that you want, you need when you're in that kind of a position.
But here's the thing. If the ME comes back and says cause of death undetermined with Celeste Rivas, I think the DA would have a next to impossible chance of securing any conviction against anyone, because I don't see how you prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt if the ME has enough doubt to say, I don't know.
It's such a fascinating question. I'm old enough to remember, you're old enough to remember back in the day when it was there was a gentleman, a deputy DA named J. Miller Levy, who made his career in the 40s and 50s because he was one of the first people who was able to prove a murder case without a body, literally without a
Right.
corpus. And now what you're suggesting is, could you prove a murder case with no cause of death?
I think it's hard. I think it's harder when you have the body and they say, we just can't figure it out.
Well, there are people who have been convicted and sitting in prison who that very instance has been the case because a prosecutor has come along and said, no, that's just the ME's opinion that he couldn't do it. I'm going to prove to a jury, or takes the position that they can prove that to a jury through circumstantial evidence.
How rare is that?
Very rare, very rare.
So, I mean, if, the DA does not want to take on a high profile case like this, which is a loser. And I just see, with all the people coming in and out, because remember, whoever put the body in the trunk, even if it's a murder, doesn't mean that's the person who's the killer.
Correct. And by the way, you would imagine one of the law enforcement techniques is I personally think that it would be shocking if they didn't already have that information.
I think they do. I think everything that I've not been told this definitively, but I know that they've already seen video from the Tesla, and they know who put that body in the car. I mean, they just know. And
well, not only would they have the information from the Tesla, but then the next thing that they would do is whoever the universe of suspects who are, and when I say suspect, I just mean the people they suspect of putting the body in the Tesla. They would get the Tesla movements. They've already got that. That's a given. That they know when that Tesla was moved, how it was moved. They've got a universe or a data set of the people who have access to the Tesla.
And they have video.
Right. And they've got the video, presumably would show. But in addition to that, even if they had the video that shows, they've already got the cell phone records of all of the people involved. They've tried to triangulate the cell phones which ping off of the cell towers within a certain radius. They've tried to lay that over, if you will, or overlay that so that they can show basically where the phone was with somebody and where the car was. And when they have an overlay and they've got a video, bingo, they would imagine at that point that they've triangulated and they've overlaid it and they've got the person who put it into the car. Then what they would do is they go to that person and say, you need to talk to us and you need to tell us, where did you find what condition, and then they would work backwards to try and deconstruct that to test that or corroborate the story that they're getting.
And there's no way that person well, I suppose unless they get immunity, that they're just going to say, oh, sure, I'll tell you who told me to put the body in the Tesla.
Well, that I push back on. I can't tell you that you've seen those ads by lawyers, shut the fuck up. Those are the only words you should know if you're ever interrogated by the police. It's amazing to me how many people. I just had a hearing recently where somebody had said something. If they hadn't said anything, there was no way they'd be in custody. I mean, it's a common occurrence. People often think that they're going to talk their way out of something, and they usually 9 times out of 10 talk their way into something.
I get it. But whoever this is has known now for a couple of months that this is top priority for LAPD. So they've clearly thought of that. And everybody has been talking about the fact that there's video on this Tesla that would show who opened the trunk. So there is going to be pretty clearly someone who put that body in some form in that trunk. That doesn't mean that's the person who killed her or grabbed her after she OD'd or whatever. But I just see this as a much bigger problem as a case than, oh my God, look, David was dating this 14-year-old. It was in David's car. That a lot of people are jumping to this conclusion. Got to be David. Got to prove it's David. No doubt it's David. But when you start looking at the dots that need to get connected, that whoever put it in the car, not necessarily the person who may have killed her, and we don't even know if she was killed, she may have OD'd, but we can't know that because the body's too decomposed to get a definitive tox. So there are a lot of steps here that make any kind of prosecution other than the possibility of sex with an underage girl very difficult.
I don't disagree with any of that. In fact, if you're right and they have the video, which I suspect
They
I
do. They
agree
do.
with you at it, then what I would surmise is if they have not made an arrest to prosecute the person, because that there is a crime there, it's not a high grade or a serious or violent felony in and of itself. But if they haven't made an arrest, that would suggest that the person who they have on video is not David. It would also suggest that it's somebody who has admitted to moving the body, and it would suggest somebody who was being very cooperative with the police.
Do you think at this point, from what you're hearing, that there are people cooperating and talking?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They all 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 arrows point towards somebody talking, somebody, or and I think more than one person cooperating, giving them a lot of information, but not answering the ultimate question. And that's the which you've outlined. Where ultimate question is, was there any foul play involved in her death? And so far, I think that is the dead end, and that is what's holding this up.
I would agree. Okay. Didn't crack the case, but I think what
We're
this,
getting close. We're
well,
getting close.
I think what this shows is that everybody thought slam dunk. I smell the smoke. I see what's going on, pointing at David. It ain't that simple.
It's never, I always think it's never that simple, but
Yep.
that should be.
Okay, my
Anyway,
friend.
talk to you, Harvey.
See ya.
Thank you.
See ya.